Hello everyone, this is RaySpace and welcome back to Realism Overhaul Sandbox in Kerbal Space Program 1.12. In one of the videos where I was working on the American version of the UR-700A, that is taking a Soviet concept rocket and making an American version of it with American engines, viewer Mikolaj suggested doing the opposite, taking a American concept rocket, the Nova, which was an advanced Saturn rocket, and making a Soviet version of it. And I decided I might as well get that out of the way before I forget. The Soviet Nova. There are three possible variants of the Soviet Nova. So the rules are that I have the same engine count on the stages of the original Nova, and broadly speaking, they're the same kinds of engines. Now, on the real Nova rocket, well, I say real, but I mean, on the Nova rocket concept from the American space program, they used kerosene-oxygen engines for the first stage, which were F1 engines, or F1As, etc. We are not using kerosene-oxygen engines, but the Soviet equivalent would be the UDMH and NTO. They didn't really develop a really large kerosene-oxygen engine, unfortunately, but they did develop a very large UDMH and NTO engine, the RD-270, and it's functionally the same class of engines, so that's why we have them here. And the Nova rocket had 8 of them, 8 F1 engines, and so we have 8 RD-270 engines. That leaves us with a little bit less lift mass because the F1s are more powerful, but the engines are more efficient by a little bit, and so it sort of makes up for that. And you can see we have 3 minutes and 25 seconds of burn time right now, liftoff thrust weight ratio 1.28. So the next stage is the problem. Now, for Nova, they had J2 engines on the next 2 stages, and there isn't exactly an equivalent hydrogen-oxygen engine for the Soviet space program. There are smaller ones and bigger ones, and they're all later on. They're not 1960s, unlike the RD-270s. That was a thing that was tested, or they were trying to make in the 60s. So we have 2 options, and that's why we have different variants of the Soviet Nova. The 2 options that I've considered are the RD-57M, which is for the upper stage of the Vulcan rocket. This is the Soviet Vulcan rocket with a K, and this was an adaptation of the Energia rocket, so this is later, like in the 80s. And the other option is the RD-0120, which was also for the Energia rocket. That was the core engine of the Energia rocket, the equivalent of the SSMEs on the shuttle, and so that's much more powerful. So these are underpowered. They only have 400 kilonewtons, so that's bad because the J2s have 1,000. So the J2s are in the middle. These are half the thrust, or less than half the thrust, 400 kilonewtons. The J2s have 1,000 kilonewtons, or a little bit more than that. And then the RD-0120s have double. They are about 1,900 to 2,000 kilonewtons. So we have this option, or we have the RD-0120s. The RD-0120s might seem like the obvious thing. We have more power. That's great, right? But they do have the one drawback that they only have one ignition. These were meant as an upper stage engine, so they have more than one ignition. Also, there's a little bit of a question mark whether you can even light the RD-0120s in mid-air. I'm assuming you can. So we'll just go with that. I'll show that variant next time. Let's just cover this variant this time. So we have 8. It was supposed to have 8 J2s. Now we have 8 of these engines. They are weaker. And so we see a very low thrust weight ratio at the start of the stage, which is going to be a problem, and why this is all a question mark. And we have one of them on the next stage, which is how Nova was set up. And so we proceed with that. And then the payload that we are trying to get is 77 tons. So maybe it can be more. We want to get, there's 77 tons to the moon. I don't care about low Earth orbit anymore. Who cares about low Earth orbit? Moon at least, and then further on at best. Okay, so 77 tons. I've done low Earth orbit so much. If I'm going to low Earth orbit, I'm using the shuttle. That's it. So anyway, 77 tons. Maybe we can bump it to 80 tons. Let's just make it a round number. Feel guilty having this. We do want this stage to complete orbit so that that stage gets deorbited, but maybe just a little bit Maybe just a little bit. 18 minutes though. It's really gonna be annoying because of the weak engines. But then we're gonna have the opposite problem with the RD-0120. If you guys have any idea about the Soviet engine that actually, why do the nodes get really small on me? Anyway, a Soviet engine that has 1,000 kilonewtons in his hydrolocks, by all means, tell me. I mean, I could always make it, even if there isn't a good model of it, I can make one. So, I mean, I'm assuming that because everything was secret, that they won't have a good picture necessarily, but, you know, I can figure it out. So, our rocket here is 4,200 tons, which isn't a huge amount more than the Saturn V. It's 1,200 tons more, so what is that, 40% more? And of course, that's how Nova was meant to be. It was meant to lift off from the same pads. And this is 12.2 meters, just like Nova was. That's 10.1 meters, though shorter than the tank for that stage would have been because we have weaker engines. And then this is 6.2 meters instead of 6.6 for the S4 stage, but I decided I would go with the Vulcan tag there. So we are alternate Vulcan rocket, really. And it's not a 1960s rocket because the upper stage engines are from later, but we can't do too much about that. You'll notice that I put the Saturn V fins on, and that's really because I needed the fairings around the engines. They do stick out, even if I tuck them in more, get them closer together, which would jeopardize the gimbaling. Even if I did that, their rim still sticks out, so we might as well put the Saturn V fairings on for the heck of it. And they would probably have had a grid fin thing going on, as they always did with the large rockets, the Soviets. But I'm not putting the grid fins. We'll have this. We'll imagine that they copied it. It happens. Okay, so we've got too many things going on here. Ah, that's the engine fairings. We'll have that on separation. Okay, so let's see how it does. Alright, we are launching from Baikonur, as we must. And I'm not going to use ascent guidance because I want to make absolutely sure that we deorbit this stage. And I'm not entirely sure how to tell it to make sure to deorbit this stage. So it has to stop that stage before orbit and then finish orbit with this stage. And how I tell it that, I'm not entirely sure. So yeah, we are just going to go manually here. SAS on, throttle is up, ignition. And launch. We'll just go straight out from Baikonur. Alright, we are past the speed of sound. Now we're at Saturn V mass levels. Got a weird blue haze going on. Makes it look like water when it isn't. Well, that's RSS Reborn for some reason. Doesn't work well around here. Probably would shut down half of the engines or something. We're up a little bit too high here. Alright, staging. 8 of these. Well, 8 minutes. Bearing set. Well, now the landscape's looking better now that we're in space. I'll just point to prograde. Well, it looks like we have a bit too much Delta V. I did add an expansion tank to this Vulcan Vesuvius tank that was from the Energia mod, and because otherwise we wouldn't have enough. We might need to extend that procedural expansion tank, and maybe add some more payload even. I was a bit conservative because I knew this was a long stage with low thrust weight ratio, but maybe a little bit too conservative here. Yeah, I ended up way too high. Okay, well, 378 by 196 is not great. 354 meters per second, and this stage wasn't supposed to get to orbit. So we definitely need more at the top. And let's just adjust that. I mean, there's a lot going on here. It takes a little bit more delta V to get to orbit here at Baikonur and all that business, but that was 9,700, so probably overdoing it anyway. But 21-minute stage here is not super. I mean, it's not unheard of, but it's not wonderful to contemplate. On the bright side, we're looking at pumping this up maybe to 90 tons. And this with the weak engines, remember. We're gonna get better with the RD0120s. So, might as well stage the fairings when we start that stage. Alright. Let's try this. 90 instead of 80. To the moon. Okay, it's a bit bouncy, but here we go. Throttle up, SAS is on, ignition. And launch. Okay, past the speed of sound. These engines don't really have much throttling. Okay, staging. Yeah, seems pretty easy to control it. Doesn't really dip down much. Oh, that should be just about right. Okay, staging. So that's suborbital as planned. And this is making orbit with enough to transfer the 90 tons over to the moon. Especially if a proper space program was doing it instead of me and my impatience and instantaneous nodes. But let's just get an off-plane transfer plotted. Okay, there we have a journey to the moon. It's gonna take extra time because it's an off-plane transfer. So we should have just waited for the moon a little bit longer before launching. But it cost 3,136. We've got 130 extra. I don't want to do the burn because it's a 20-minute burn. Of course I can do fizz warp, but I'm probably gonna have to do multiple burns with it because otherwise it's not gonna be accurate with our instantaneous nodes. So let's just say that it has enough for this. So we're talking about 90 tons with this rocket that has 4,200 tons on the launch pad, 90 tons to the moon. And we're just using UDMH, NTO, and Hydrolox. If we take a look at the tanks, so it's just aluminum gridded tanks all the way. I did not do any special tanks. This one was pre-configured, of course. It's not really zero dry or anything like that. It's a proper tank. And this one is just aluminum gridded tank, and so is... Oh, wait, this one was a composite tank. No! No! I accidentally made that one a composite tank. Okay, well, how much does that throw things off? I don't think it throws things off much, but I must have misclicked it at some point. That was not intentional. So it's a heavier tank, and it seems like it loses us maybe 200 meters per second. So, okay, let's just... So fine, 85 tons instead of 90 is what happens when we change that bottom tank back to aluminum gridded, which is what I was intending. So now it's all better. But that is the configuration with the RD57Ms. I will leave you guys to guess how it's going to do with the RD0120s. And that is really a more interesting option than this. I don't think we really want the long burn times of the RD57Ms. Yeah. So, Soviet Nova 1, folks. With that, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below. And I'll see you next time.